Yo! What's going on, YouTube? It's Kael'thas3457. So, long story made short, I haven't liked the direction World of Warcraft has been going in, and I'm probably going to stop playing it. But I figured that for those of you whom are continuing to play the game, or are hoping that Mists of Pandaria will include improvements, I figured I would give you guys something nice in case I decide to resign from World of Warcraft. So I'm going to give you a walkthrough on how to solo Kael'thas in 25-man Tempest Keep, the guy who drops the Phoenix Mount. I searched on YouTube a bit for Kael'thas guide videos, and after about 5 or so videos that were super sped up and had music playing that didn't actually explain what was going on, I eventually decided to just give up and make a guide myself. The solo guide is being done by a Blood Death Knight. The rule of thumb is that if an Unholy Death Knight can do something, an Affliction Warlock can do it. If a Blood Death Knight can do something, then a Demonology Warlock can do it, and Druids and Paladins can do it. There is also a possibility that Warriors or Rogues can do it, though I am not as familiar with their class mechanics. The idea is that by watching this video, you will have an understanding of the fight and know how to solo Kael'thas, provided you're one of these above classes. I've included a full video of me killing Kael'thas, demonstrating the most effective strategy to kill him. First off, what kind of gear do you need? As you can see by my gear, actually not a lot. I have some outdated PvP stuff, 2 PvP rings that are outdated, some up-to-date PvP stuff, a Tabard of Conquest because it's awesome, a purchased with gold from a vendor neck piece and sigil, a dungeon weapon, PvE shoulders with a PvP enchantment on them because that's how I roll. As you can see, all the gear I am currently wearing is obtainable either by doing dungeons or with honor points, and I only have a couple items from the Raid Finder. The point? Anyone can do this. The gear requirement isn't all that intensive. Comparatively speaking, I am rather poorly geared. As for flasks, I use a combination of 2 elixirs. One is the elixir of the Naga to grant expertise rating. Most players attempting to solo Kael will effectively be tanking a boss, and not all of them may have proper tanking sets, so an expertise elixir helps. I combine this with a prismatic elixir, which provides magical resistance, and the bulk of the damage done by Kael'thas in this fight will be magic damage. Now for the trash mobs. Despite how well geared you are, the trash can actually kill you if you're not careful. You need to clear everything in a path between Kael'thas and the raid entrance, so that you can position the bodies of the advisors farther apart so you do not need to fight all 4 of them at the same time. The only noteworthy trash mobs are as follows. There are Squires and Paladin units that can dispel your diseases and will cast heals on other trash mobs, and should be killed first. There are patrolling Dragonhawks in the big room, of which you will need to kill 3 of them, and when fighting them you need to fight with your back against a wall because they do a knockback. Past that, there are some NPCs that I forget the name of that do a whirlwind. Back in Burning Crusade, one of these NPCs doing a full whirlwind and not being crowd-controlled was a guaranteed wipe on trash. They do an arcane flurry whirlwind. As a Death Knight, your anti-magic shell can protect you against this long enough for you to burst them down. However, you can also line of sight them to avoid the damage. This is all you need to know for clearing the trash. Each of the 4 advisors has their own little gimmick in the form of a crowd control. This is why it is hazardous to fight all 4 at once, because they can potentially CC you for an unlimited span of time. And as such, you need to split them. The slow-moving warrior advisor will silence and knockback. Neither of these are particularly hazardous for a Death Knight or a Druid or a Paladin. However, when he is in melee range, he will apply a stacking dot bleed effect on you, and if this is allowed to get too high, it can potentially kill you. For a non-warlock, he is the last target of the 4 to die once you fight all 4 at once, so it is important to either heal yourself or kite away from him in between melee attacks to avoid being hit with additional rends. Now let's take a look at talents and glyphs. My talent build is set up for Blood Spec, though there is one potential problem with this build. Bloodworms can potentially trigger a bug on Kael'thas that will make him reset, but in 10 fights I've only seen this bug activate 1 time, so the odds of this are fairly low. But if you are feeling paranoid, you don't really need bloodworms. It is important to make sure you are in the proper presence, as you will likely need to change it at various points in the fight. After the Paladin advisor dies during the phase where you fight 1 advisor at a time, it is important for you to switch out of Frost Presence and into Unholy for the movement speed bonus, so you can get past Capernian and drag her to the wall so as to better position her. If you are someone who has trouble remembering to use abilities like Blood Tap or Vampiric Blood, or like trinkets, I recommend you click them before pulling Kael'thas and use them during the initial period fighting his adds 1 at a time to help you remember to use them later. The Paladin advisor's only noteworthy feature is his fear. He is essentially the weakest of the 3 advisors. Capernian is much more dangerous. She has an 8-second disorient, which is instant cast, but can be blocked with anti-magic shell. For those in melee range, she has a knockback followed by a slow. She is easily the most dangerous of the 4 advisors to a Death Knight or Paladin, but less hazardous to a Warlock or Balanced Druid. If you are not a caster, you will want to position her where your back is against a wall so that you can, if you're impacted by the knockback and slow, still inflict damage on her. As a melee character, she should be your first priority when you enter the phase where you fight all 4 advisors at once, and positioning where the advisors die is critical for making it through this phase without complications. The 4th advisor is Hunter-Engineer type. Most of his damage will come from throwing bombs at you, which you can dodge by running away from his target point. His only other noteworthy feature is that he will apply a 1-minute-long debuff on you that will randomly stun you for 4 seconds, and can potentially chain stun you. Usually, you will immediately after killing Capernian while under the effects of anti-magic shell, activate your Icebound Fortitude or other stun-breaking or stun immunity cooldown during the phase where you fight all 4 advisors at once. If you are a class that lacks these, you can also use Alchemist-made free action or living action potions to provide the same effect, or a PvP trinket, or the human racial, etc. Between fighting the advisors one at a time and fighting all 4 at once, Kael'thas will spawn a number of weapons. You must kill all of them. After killing all of them, a timer will trigger for Kael'thas to resurrect his advisors, so you must position yourself to intercept Capernian in this time frame, if you are not a Warlock or Balanced Druid. If you take too long killing the ads, however, the respawn will be triggered anyway. It's important to target the Cosmic Infuser weapon first, because it casts an interruptible heal, and I like to kill the Devastation next after that. Beyond that point, it doesn't really matter in what order you kill the weapons. However, if you are a caster, you may want to loot the corpse of a staff that drops, pick up the weapon, and equip it, because it will grant immunity for a good chunk of CCs during this fight. Despite the lack of stats on the weapon for level 85, the immunity to such a large amount of crowd control will make it much easier for a caster to do this fight. As for glyphs, there are only a few that are really relevant to this fight. The 3 prime glyphs I have equipped are really the only prime glyphs useful for a Blood Death Knight in this fight. But I would say the most important glyph would be the glyph of anti-magic shell to extend its duration by 2 seconds. This provides an extremely large benefit to a Death Knight of any spec because it allows for, if activated at the proper time, interception of 2 of Kael'thas' Pyroblast spells instead of just 1. The only other noteworthy glyphs are the glyph of Blood Tap and glyph of Vampiric Blood. Glyph of Vampiric Blood is up to you and your playstyle ultimately, and will depend on how well geared you are or how tanky you are. I am not using the Vampiric Blood glyph during this fight. Humans have a distinct advantage in this fight over other races in that they have a PvP trinket racial which can save them from potentially bad RNG. This boss fight is incredibly RNG intensive. What RNG means is random number generator. There are a lot of random effects, in this case mostly crowd controls, that can go off at the same time and do so randomly without a set pattern or timer, meaning you can be potentially without control of your character for a protracted period of time. Technically you can solo Kael'thas wearing blues, but you would have to be very lucky in terms of the random number generator. The better geared you are, the less luck you need, because due to your higher damage, the fight will last for a smaller period of time, and due to your higher health pool, that RNG will be less likely to cause fatal problems for you for your encounter. Part of my reasoning for doing this fight, in Honor, LFR, and Dungeon gear, was to illustrate the point that you do not need to be well geared to have the fight go smoothly. Once all 4 of Kael'thas' advisors have been defeated, the actual boss fight begins. You must not pull Kael'thas out into the large room where the Phoenix is in, or you will trigger 2 boss fights at once. Kael'thas himself does several things of note, all on random timers, which can work together to take out a lot of your health very quickly. First, he will occasionally cast Arcane Disruption, which is an 8-second disorient effect that is not broken on damage. He also casts an area of effect spell similar to Flame Strike that is targeted at the ground, with the explosion happening a few seconds later. You should not be hit by this unless you are standing in it during disorient. To lower the odds of this happening, you should be ready to move away from a Flame Strike location at any moment, and generally keep moving while within melee range of Kael'thas. Next of his noteworthy abilities is the Summon Phoenix ability. These guys do extra damage to you throughout most of the fight, though they are mainly harmless otherwise. They can be killed quickly and easily, and your death strikes against them can be used to recover much needed health, as they are grey to you. The catch with the Phoenix is that each one that dies spawns an egg, which must be destroyed to prevent it from reviving. The linchpin of this fight is Kael'thas' Pyroblast spell, which will do around 50,000 damage to you. Kael'thas will chain cast Pyroblast until you damage him enough to destroy his shield and interrupt him. It can be very hazardous for him to start casting Pyroblast right after you've been hit with Arcane Disruption, and this is the primary cause of deaths in this phase. And he can technically hit you with Arcane Disruption and immediately follow it with a Pyroblast, guaranteeing a hit from Pyroblast unless you have a cooldown to break the crowd control. For a Death Knight, the trick is to trigger your anti-magic shell just a moment before Kael'thas finishes casting Pyroblast, so that your shell can intercept it and also have a duration to intercept the follow-up Pyroblast. Barring being very unlucky with an Arcane Disruption and Pyroblast combo, a Death Knight should not be hit by the full damage of a Pyroblast at any point during this fight. Warlocks should not have to worry about this issue because most should have obtained the staff to make them immune to the Arcane Disruption spell. If you are a melee class, this part of the fight is mainly about managing your cooldowns. Most people habitually wait for Pyroblast and save their cooldowns for recovery immediately after Pyroblast, or potential interception of Pyroblast. While this is worthwhile for a Death Knight's anti-magic shell, and in some cases Icebound Fortitude, or another class's mitigation spells like Hand of Protection, other spells based on healing or recovery, and not on damage mitigation, are not necessarily best spent in this manner. The best way to live through Pyroblast and Crowd Control, and Phoenix and Flamestrike combinations, is to make sure your character is at full health going into them, which can be difficult, as you have no idea when most of these random effects are going to take place. If you are a Death Knight, you will want to blow several of your cooldowns in order to heal yourself to full. Prevention beats cure in this fight. The key to use which prevention methods your class has open to you, so that you are sure you can survive the full damage of a Pyroblast if you take a hit, which you may very well have to, as Distortion lasts for 8 seconds, whereas Pyroblast can be cast on you within that time. You exit this phase when you've taken Kael down to half health, meaning you can be hit with any combination of these abilities a potentially infinite number of times if you take too long to DPS down Kael. Once Kael reaches half health, he will run away for a little while, do a small amount of dialogue, and enter the next phase. During this, you have a lot of time to heal, and for some classes, time to reset your cooldowns. Kael'thas will eventually run to you and attack you and trigger Gravity Lapse, teleporting you to him. This phase relies most on the player not making any mistakes. Kael'thas in this phase is identical to how he was in the previous phase, but with a couple different and less dangerous spells added into his rotation. Arguably, this phase is easier as a result of that, but if you make a mistake, it can still cost you this fight. Kael'thas' Gravity Lapse teleports you to him and allows you to swim around in the air as if there was no gravity. Kael does less damage during this, and his spells while doing Gravity Lapse are not as threatening. However, there are things to watch out for. Upon casting Gravity Lapse, Kael'thas will spawn several small clouds around him, and standing in these clouds will reduce your maximum health by 10% per stack, capping at 9 stacks, 90% health. Sitting in a cloud for a few seconds will quickly take off 90% of your maximum health for about a minute, meaning that a single fireball from Kael'thas will likely kill you. Paladins can compensate for this mistake with Bubble, if it hasn't been spent to protect against a Pyroblast already. The key is to avoid being hit by these bubbles. Kael'thas has a very wide hitbox for melee characters, and there will always be a place open to you that you can find as a melee character to allow you to damage Kael'thas in melee, as Kael'thas doesn't spawn enough clouds to completely block off his entire hitbox. You may, however, have a hard time finding it through the clouds. If you avoid touching any of the clouds, Gravity Lapse is effectively free damage time, where Kael is less likely to cast his actual threatening spells, though he still can cast them, and will return to his previous casting pace once Gravity Lapse is over. At that point, you continue fighting whatever RNG cards fate throws at you, until Kael'thas is dead and you have your Phoenix mount. This concludes my tutorial for how to solo the Phoenix mount boss, Kael'thas 25-man in Tempest Keep. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube!